Capital Week. Everything we've done so far has been recorded. So our primer session from Monday will be up online. Russell did a great presentation for Cardiff Uni with Wizard on Tuesday, which is already online, you'll have seen, with Mark Jones from Ciceron in Wrexham on Wednesday, and then finish Wednesday with Jamie Grundy reading from his book, 90 Minutes of Freedom, all about the only, is it the only prison football team in Wales or in the UK? Only prison team, anyway, prison football team. Brilliant story. We also published Walkspiration download on Tuesday, which is 12 ways to make a walk more powerful and boost your well-being. And then yesterday, I know one or two of you would have been with us when we had the guys from Extinction Rebellion, so Caroline Paykel, who set up and runs their assembly process. Fascinating in terms of the way in which they manage dialogue processes and kind of better working. And Ronan McNairn, who's their head of comms, talking about how they use sort of processes like deep listening to get really kind of strong relationships with media and kind of get over some of the barriers. So there are, some fantastic things that have happened through the week that will be on the Grow Social Capital website, and you can listen to recordings of. And we are recording today, so just for everybody to be aware that anything you say will be recorded and will be available online. So just want to kind of flag that. Oh, thanks. Andy and Russ put in some links to some of the things I was just talking about in the chat. Right, I think 7 minutes, we say, I think was the rule we were given yesterday in terms of, letting people kind of arrive. So I'm going to make a start, I think, if that's okay with everybody, and we'll let anybody else in as they come through. He says, sharing screen, 2 seconds. There we are. Are we working? Excellent. Welcome, everybody, to today's event, Tummler School, a word I shall explain very shortly. We are Grow Social Capital. So this is a new social enterprise we set up just before Christmas, working to address the challenge of changing levels of social capital in society. And we look at these changes as the root cause for many of the social issues and challenges that we're facing, including growing divisions and distrust, fewer people getting involved in civic society, and more people feeling isolated. And we think there's a collective ability that we all have to help each other through social capital. So we set the organisation up to try and look at how we can develop new responses to enable organisations, individuals, communities to do something practical and positive to grow social capital, as the name suggests. We are Andy Green and myself have known each other for about 20 years through our work in the PR and comms industry. Russell Todd, community development specialist, and Sarah Tamsin, who is our web and digital specialist, and making sure that all of this happens as smoothly as possible. We're a mix of backgrounds, which is what we think gives us a kind of unique view on what we're doing with social capital. And one of the ideas that has come out of trying to do something positive and practical is Tummler School. So Tummler is a Yiddish word for somebody who gets a party going. We've all been at a wedding party or something where the dance floor's empty, but it only takes one person to get up on the dance floor to start getting it filled up. Those people, the people who are the prompts, the people who can get people going, are called Tummlers. And we think that's a good job description. We think that's a good idea for anybody that wants to think about how you make a difference to communities and partnerships. So on the last Friday of every month, we're going to run these Tummler School webinars as a chance to listen and learn and collectively grow from conversations about change making. And we were looking for somebody, obviously, to be our first speaker, and my mind immediately went to Sophie Howe, who is, as many on the call will know, the first and only, I think, Future Generations Commissioner in the world still, with a remit to be the guardian of the interests of future generations in Wales. Sophie's been in the role since 2016 and has led high-profile interventions around transport planning, education reform, and climate change, challenging the government and others to demonstrate how they're taking account of future generations. She's been described by the Big Issue magazine as one of the UK's leading change makers, and we are absolutely thrilled to have her here with us today for the launch of Tummler School. I'm going to hand over to Sophie. I know you've got a couple of slides you wanted to run through. Then we're going to have a chat, and then I'll open the floor up for questions. So, Sophie, do you want to kind of give us your intro?
Thanks, Matt. It's lovely to be with you, and I love the concept of Tummler School. When Matt asked me to do this, he sort of described the, it's how one person can get other people dancing, and there's a video which sort of does the rounds occasionally on YouTube of like a crazy dancing man at a festival. If you just Google YouTube crazy dancing man, it will come up, and it's actually the video that I used in my sort of first sort of conversation with the team that I was building when we set up the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner, because essentially that's what I suppose we were trying to do: build a movement around new ways of doing things, build a movement around challenging the status quo, and creating a vision of better ways of doing things and a kind of better Wales. Can you move on for me, Matt? So why do we need a kind of Future Generations Act? I think this kind of graphic here is really compelling. So this is looking back 50,000 years in history, and looking forward 50,000 years. So you can see the screen's not very big there, but there's about 100 billion people who are dead, who were alive and are now dead in the past 50,000 years. There's 7.7 billion living, and then the scale of unborn generations, that massive orange blob, 6.75 trillion people to come. So we've got, a lot of responsibility on our shoulders as the living now. We've got a lot of responsibility to be good ancestors, and that sort of quote there, it's not our right to use the world for ourselves, but our responsibility to maintain the planet for future generations. That's essentially what the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and what my role is about. Can I have the next one, Matt? And why do we do that? No, we do not. You've only got to look at some of the catastrophic things happening to the planet. And again, this graph is kind of really telling here, because this is showing that since 1990, which was when Al Gore published his first Inconvenient Truth, and when the United Nations published their first kind of evidence base around climate change happening and the impact that it could have on our planet. Since that point, since we knew, we've put more carbon into the atmosphere than at any other time during human history. So we've done that knowingly, and which basically says we're kind of not being good ancestors. And it is absolutely right that people like Greta Thunberg, and we've got our own Welsh versions here of Greta, Sean and Maisie and Poppy, who are calling us out on that, quite rightly so. You know, adults keep saying we owe it to young people to give them hope. We don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. Absolutely, we should be panicking, and we should be panicking in the interests of our children and our grandchildren. And it's not just the carbon emissions issue, it's a loss of biodiversity. I suppose things which are very close to home at the moment, if you can move on for me, Matt, things around our health and well-being. So this is kind of, you know, where we are in terms of what makes a difference to our health and well-being. This is from the World Health Organization, and they've looked at what makes a difference between life expectancy. So I can see from the chat, loads of us are from Cardiff. I'm in Whitchurch at the moment. I've got a pretty good chance of living about 10 years longer than someone who's in Grangetown or Butetown. That cannot be possibly right. What causes, or what are the issues which can address that health inequality gap and maintain and enhance life expectancy? Actually, only about 10% of what makes a difference is about the healthcare system itself. We spend 50% of the whole Welsh Government budget on the healthcare system, by the way, and, you know, we all love the NHS, but essentially it's not a national health service, it's a national illness service, because we park our ambulance at the bottom of the cliff and we wait for people to fall off, and then we repair the broken leg when they do. This is showing you, if you can see the figures here, 35% of what makes a difference is income security and social protection, which, by the way, is completely out of date now, because massive increases in people working in the gig economy, for example. You know, our welfare state doesn't work for that, where you might earn 500 quid one week and, you know, 50 quid the next. Should we be considering things, progressive things like a universal basic income to plug that gap, not just because of those kind of future trends and scenarios around the gig economy, around the inefficiency of the welfare state as it is, but also because it makes 35% of a difference to what keeps us well. And if we address those sorts of issues, we've got a much better chance of improving the whole population, keeping people out of hospital, reducing demand on our NHS and so on. 29% of what makes a difference is living conditions, the quality of your housing. Do you live in areas of high air pollution, which, by the way, you're more likely to if you're poor or if you're black? And why, you know, and why is that? And so, you know, can we be surprised that, there was a brilliant article in Wales on the BBC last week from Kelechi Nonaham, who is the Director of Public Health in Cwm Taff, and he said, we cannot say we did not know that people in Cwm Taff were going to be the hardest hit by COVID. Anyone could have predicted that, because we know this stuff. We know that it's about living conditions. We know that it's about social protection, whether you live in poverty or not. And yet we're failing to address any of these things. Again, really interestingly, the purple blob there, 19%, is about community and relationships. So do you have a sense of agency in your community? You know, do you have people you can turn to in your hour of need? You know, and back, which is some of the really good stuff that's come out of COVID. It's not all bad, although it's, you know, it is pretty grim. But 2 years ago, the National Wellbeing Survey for Wales, people were asked in the national survey, is there a sense of community in your area? 52% of people in Wales thought there was. The national survey, which came out last December, so which was done during COVID, that had risen to 74%. So when that makes 19% of the difference to our levels of life expectancy and addressing health inequality, we've got to be asking some fundamental questions around, actually, would we be better off in creating the conditions where communities can thrive, perhaps having a reduced working week, perhaps what if every member of the NHS had time off for volunteering rather than just delivering a service? Would that actually start to embed that sense of community which makes that difference? Next one, please, Matt. So how things have changed. So I guess when I started my my role, I was like the mad futures woman, banging on about, you know, all of this environmental stuff and making these connections and so on. This is the CBI in 2017 criticises negative Future Generations Commissioner and says that there should be a review of her role and the Act and so on. This, of course, was because of my challenges around the M4 relief road, and, you know, there in this box in the BBC article, I've said, you know, completely radical stuff like, you know, there's more to prosperity than economic growth, you know, that I criticised borrowing powers or financing, the future generations financing the M4 Relief Road, and that, you know, I was yet to be convinced that taking forward programmes like the semiconductor plant in Newport should, you know, had genuinely involved people and was going to be connecting those high quality jobs back to those furthest from the labour market, women, BAME communities and so on. So how very dare I? And, you know, how things change. This is an extract of a letter from the CBI to the First Minister in June 2020. We support the Future Generations Commissioner's proposals to grow the low carbon environmental goods and services market, blah, blah, blah. We also want them to incentivise remote working for those employees who wish to do so, which indeed is a kind of game changer in terms of whether we need to spend £1.5 to £2 billion on building a 30-mile stretch of motorway. So things are starting to change when we've grown this movement, and I think actually COVID has been you know, in some ways helpful. It's been a shock to the system. It's allowed people to really sort of, you know, it's escalated very many of the future trends that I've been banging on about for a long time, but it's also allowed people to think, God, we've got to think radically different now if we're going to come out of this. So just a couple of highlights of things that have changed. Can I go on to the next one, Matt? So this week, the Welsh Government published its new economic resilience plan, wellbeing economy right at the heart of it. We could not conceive that this would be an economic plan coming out of the Welsh Government about 5 years ago. So a wellbeing economy centred around prosperous, green and equal. And there's a tweet from someone there in Scotland. There's lots in here that could be critiqued, but can we all just pause for a second and appreciate a national economic plan that entirely left out the words growth and GDP, not even rescued as the mythical inclusive, just gone, lovely. So this is the kind of state of change that we're now starting to see. And the next one, please, Matt. And again, if we look at the new transport strategy, which came out from Welsh Government, that well, both the economic one and this one, I and my team have been very heavily involved and shaking some trees in government and, you know, trying to make sure that it's fully aligned. But there we've got the travel hierarchy with walking and cycling right at the top of it, then public transport, then low emissions vehicles, and only then other private motor vehicles. So this is how transport infrastructure and funding will flow now as this transport strategy rolls out. You'll see that our first priority is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by planning ahead for better physical and digital connectivity and so on. So back, you know, when I said we don't need an M4, we need better broadband to get people working from home, and we need better investment in public transport, and we need to make the connections between active travel and health. And they said that I was mad. This is now what is in our national transport strategy. And the next one, please, Matt. And again, you can see this coming through in national planning policy, which is now fully centred around wellbeing outcomes. It's too small for you to see there, but throughout that document, the waste hierarchy, which puts prevention and reuse at the top, preparation for reuse, recycling, and so on. And this is getting us towards that aspiration that the government has set out for us to be a zero waste nation by 2050. And then we've got the energy hierarchy in planning policy there as well. So things are really starting to change. Now, I'm often a bit of a critic of government strategy and policy, because I think sometimes it's a bit of, you know, we say the right things in documents and then we think our work here is done, and our work here isn't done. But this gives a really good framework to how things are starting to change in Wales. Can I have the next one, please, Matt? Some big challenges going forward in terms of COVID recovery and opportunities around jobs and skills for the future. Opportunities for about 60,000 direct and indirect jobs to be created in the green economy in the next 2 years, but we have nowhere near the skills pipeline to meet those jobs. So if I told you that in like agriculture and land management, which are going to be massive if we're going to restore nature, which the government says we're going to do, last year apprenticeships were about between 150 to 200 people, and none of of them were women. So, and, you know, if you look at the proportions of women and BAME communities in these jobs, they are just not there, or are there in tiny, tiny numbers. So we're going to have to do something pretty spectacular to take advantage of the green and just recovery that the government are talking about. And then the next one, please, Matt. And I suppose, you know, this is just something that I try to live my life on, be fearless in pursuit of what sets your soul on fire. So the stuff that I've been talking about today, the stuff that I do in this job, is the stuff that sets my soul on fire. I was criticised for being a Labour insider and I'd go easy on the government, but I don't think that I've done that. And I think if we all are fearless in pursuit of what sets our soul on fire, we're probably well on the journey to a better Wales and a better world. That's it.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. It kind of, I'm going to come back to that, to sort of where you started, because the start and the end link both to the sort of first thing I wanted to ask you, which was when I shared the idea of Tummler School with you, I had a brilliant email back within minutes, I think, practically, that just said, I love it, I'll do it, thanks, which was fantastic. And I was like, ooh, you jumped at the chance. What is it about the idea of being a change maker that excites you, that gives you that fire?
So I think it's, you know, I've always, throughout my whole career, kind of felt that the system is mad in very many ways. I can remember, and I can see one of my old and good friend, Jones, on the call here, Simon Jones. Simon and I used to work together for an MP many moons ago. And one of the things that we worked on there back in, God, I don't know, 1997, I think it was the fact that it was on disability benefits, and the fact that dealing with all these cases from an MP's office, there were so many people who were going to appeal because of their disability benefits, and then the vast majority of them were being accepted on appeal. And essentially that meant that the decision in the first place was wrong, and people who already had a really difficult life were being forced to go through this madness of a system, which was just basically hoping that they would give up and sort of drop out and not get their benefits. So those are some of the kind of, you know, early things that I just thought, you know, the system has got to be a better way, because what we were seeing was the direct impact on people's lives. The system is just seeing, oh, well, they're a number, and actually we've got some targets to reduce disability benefit and so on and so on. And so I suppose it's that kind of connection back to the personal stories, and then how the system works or doesn't work for those people. And that has always kind of frustrated me. And that's the stuff where I get really passionate and want to shake up a system. My last job in South Wales Police, my big area of passion is tackling violence against women and girls. 35,000 incidents a year of domestic abuse. And in most cases, 88% of those cases, we'd fill in a form, we'd send it off to people to cover our arses that we told people, and we'd done a risk assessment, and then nothing further would happen. So, you know, that system, and we go back to the same victim again and again and again, because that's how the system responds. The system isn't people shaped, the system is system shaped. And again, we're not solving any of the problems, we're just keeping the system safe. And that makes me mad and makes me want to change it.
So how do you take that obvious kind of passion for change and use it to inspire others to come along on that journey with you? How do you kind of inspire a team, or how do you inspire people to kind of break down some of these barriers that exist in the system? Because that's you know, lots of people would get to that system point and just think it's too big.
Yeah, and you know, and sometimes I remember when I first started this job having, like, you know, terrible sleepless nights, going, oh my God, it's absolutely massive. Where do we start? And what if people don't do it? And, you know, and then I sort of sat back and I was like, right, Sophie, it's not your actual job to make sure that, you know, every single decision across the whole of Wales and every single person is doing this stuff. You've got to, you know, start somewhere and build a movement. And, you know, very quickly I started sort of recognizing these frustrated champions that I talk about. So people who, you know, who were probably the kind of, you know, wanted to be the crazy dancing man can anyway, but perhaps, you know, and perhaps were a few years ago until the system beat it, you know, beat it out of them. And you have to find those crazy dancing people who are going to join your movement. I call them the frustrated champions, so the people who've been able to see that there's a better way of doing things. So you've got to find those people. You've got to kind of big them up in terms of what they're doing and help them with the power or the position that you have to break down some of the barriers that they're encountering. I think you've got to call out the madness in like really simple terms. And you've got to do it in a way which recognises different things press different people's buttons. So I have it on good authority that the stuff that, you know, really helped to convince the First Minister on the M4 Relief Road issue, yes, was the environmental, you know, issues, which were profound, but was also the fact that I pointed out that 25% of the lowest income families in that region don't even own a car. So if you're about social justice, you're investing £1.5 billion, all of your borrowing capacity, on something which is going to make not a blind bit of difference to those lowest income families. So you have to kind of come, I think, from those different perspectives. And we've got 4 purposes as part of our strategy in my office, which we set at the beginning: highlight the big issues and challenges facing future generations, support and challenge public bodies to change the way they do things, build a movement, and walk the talk. And I think those those last ones are probably, you know, mirror it, show people, you know, that you're walking the talk, and find those people who are going to become part of your movement.
And what sort of things have you done to really kind of root out the change makers and support and champion them in your own organisation, but also in the sort of 44 public bodies that that the Act covers?
Well, God, we have so many different kind of connections into different groups and so on, and we find brilliant things that are happening. We're just published, in my Future Generations report this year, we published case studies and best practice across the board. Some small things we've done is kind of written to the chief executives of those organisations saying, hey, you know, such and such in your organisation, they're doing this really brilliant thing. You want to have a look at what they're doing and get them to do more of it, and tell everyone else in your organisation about the stuff that they're doing, and you should be really proud of it. And that gives this sort of almost like a bit of, you know, credibility. And the chief execs, they all, you know, they love to be like, oh yeah, we're doing something really good. Half the time they didn't have a clue that they were doing it, or their organisation was doing it, because what we find with, we call them the lone innovators in some ways, sometimes these people are so frustrated by the system that they're actually want to keep what they're doing, the really good stuff they're doing, quiet in case someone tells them they can't do it. We've seen that stuff where audit gets involved. There was this programme in Conway, which was basically the leisure centre working with the rehabilitation and physios and so on, and the health board. They come together to form this team. If you hear a life story from Bill, a brilliant guy up there, literally transformed his life, saved him from having this really complex and risky spinal surgery. And they've been done over by audit because they didn't fill in some weird partnership agreement process or something along those lines. And so you can see where these people are just like, oh, for God, you know, for God's sake. So I think it's about finding them and bigging them up, sharing what they're doing more widely, and going in where you can, and if they're willing to identify the barriers with you and helping them to break them down.
I guess having the Act as a framework is really helpful in that respect, because it gives people a degree of cover, I suppose. I think, you know, that it kind of it normalizes it. It gives people a structure that they can kind of wrap work around, but it also gives us that set of shared values that we know we're all pulling in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you can't underestimate that. And I think it's taken, you know, varying degrees of time for different people to kind of get on board with that. I was with some people from the business community a couple of months back, and, you know, they were saying that at the beginning they were like, what is this thing, and what's this commissioner going to do, and what does all of this mean? Now that it's, you know, one, it's getting a load of international attention. Two, it's really starting to impact in terms of how government policy is being rolled out, and it is hitting things like, you're going to need to be talking to us about this if you want contracts from us, and so on. They, you know, they actually said to me, it's like grown, and we want to be part of it, and we want the business, we want to sign up to it as businesses, because we think, you know, we like this thing of, it's like a Team Wales approach, and it gives us that kind of long-term and holistic sort of vision of where we want to go. So I think that, you know, that sort of thing is you know, is really, really important, that the Act gives us that framework. I've also been really careful to try not to get into, you know, this is a real tricky balance for me, because I got so many people who were saying, right, why isn't she, you know, kicking backside over these particular things? Well, one, you know, read the law and the specific powers that I have. I can't force anyone to do anything or stop anyone doing anything. But two, I do think it is about, you know, showing, building a movement, encouraging people to sort of, you know, to do the right thing, bigging them up when they do the right thing, and bringing people along with you in that way. Sometimes you do need to be really quite sort of challenging, but I think it is a really fine line, because the risk of just going down that kind of, you know, enforcement is the wrong word, but that kind of stick approach rather than a carrot approach, is that everyone just jumps to process, and everyone says the right things in the right plans, and they've complied with the dates by which they've got to do this and they've got to do that, and they're ticking all the boxes exactly, but they haven't actually changed. And so, you know, there's a real fine balance, I think, to be struck with all of that.
The international point's interesting. How do you, you know, we probably don't see it as much as you do, obviously, kind of, you know, speaking around the world in, you know, in the before times. What impact has it had on the kind of reputation of Wales as a, you know, are we seen internationally as a more progressive nation, do you think, as a result of the Act?
Well, yesterday I was with the UN Special Youth Envoy, Giacomo, who's a massive fan of the Act, and the week after next she is convening all departments of the United Nations to put forward a proposal for a UN High Commissioner for Future Generations, to embed that into UN policy, which would then, the idea is that that would then be rolled out in terms of what the Secretary General is saying in terms of expectations and what the UN are pushing for other countries to adopt. So if that comes off, we're not sure that it will, but if that comes off, that's massive. And so already Wales is being cited across the world at UN levels and, you know, and elsewhere as the leader in this field. You know, there's been so much interest. So the German Chancellery have had us in there to talk to them about what we're doing. We've been with the Finnish Prime Minister's office to talk to them. I was due to be in New Zealand this year, but obviously with COVID, because, you know, even though they're the kind of poster child for wellbeing economics, what they're actually doing isn't as comprehensive as what we're doing at all. So and then, you know, there's a private members bill going through the UK Parliament. It's on pause at the moment, thanks to Jacob Rees-Mogg, but and the SNP just voted at their party conference a month or so ago to put a commitment in their manifesto to have a Future Generations Act. So wouldn't surprise me if Scotland goes next. But, you know, and I could go on and on, even like the UAE, bizarrely, who have a Minister for Happiness, believe it or not, who we are quite friendly with. They have taken chunks of our Act and it's now in their national wellbeing policy. So it's rolling out across the world. It's
something that we can be really proud of for Wales, I think. I want to bring us back to a bit closer to home and social capital particularly, and just, you touched on that kind of 19% figure in your in terms of its importance. It's going to be huge in COVID recovery. What does social capital mean to you, and how do you think we can sort of grow, build, encourage, develop social capital in Wales?
I mean, I think, you know, it comes down to me to what we value, and, you know, should everything that a country, and indeed us as individuals, be about money and growth and the you know, the ability to purchase things that, you know, we probably don't need and so on. And I think that's where we've been as a society. I think we need to move away from that towards, you know, I often talk about these kind of, you know, the softer things, the things that make life worthwhile. And I think, again, COVID has kind of, you know, really made us pause and think about that in a number of ways. So the fact that, you know, I'm lucky about where I live because I can access nature within 300 meters of my doorstep. There are other people who are, you know, the most disadvantaged who cannot do that. And, you know, how they have sort of survived during COVID and so on, you know, where you can only do your daily walk. And if you're walking in a concrete jungle, that's pretty grim. So we've got to be thinking about those sorts of things. The fact that, you know, that community cohesion and that community sense of community has been absolutely huge in terms of the response to COVID. And what should that mean in terms of us going forward? The fact that, you know, should we be, you know, when we're thinking about procurement, yesterday I launched my the report of my first Section 20 review looking at the issue of procurement. And when we're spending money, you know, we should be spending it in a way which, you know, supports local businesses to help to create local jobs, which reduces our carbon emissions because we're buying local, and, you know, and all of those sorts of things. Is that whole kind of circular economy type approach. So the Act, you know, puts social capital really right at the heart of it. I think, however, it's still, and, you know, we're making progress, but it's still breaking down those sort of boundaries of, you know, I am a local authority or a health board and I deliver this service to this set of people. We have not questioned really fundamentally what should that look like and who should be involved in doing that, and how do we do it in a way which drives maximum benefits. And those are the sorts of conversations that I think we need to be having.
Yeah, I've plugged now for a blog on the Grow Social Capital site that Russell wrote, where he talks about the critically mundane things in life, you know, that some of those sort of softer things, which
like
make it really kind of, yeah. Who are you talked about the crazy people who start dancing, and you know, we've called them Tummlers. Who are the change makers that inspire you? Who are the people that maybe kind of you met and thought, yeah, I really want to learn the lessons that they could teach me?
I think that, you know what, that there's sort of, I mean, you know, you can look at people like Greta Thunberg, and undoubtedly she's a change maker. And as I said, we've got our own sort of versions of Greta here in Wales. But I think I get most inspired by those frustrated champions that I see. Yesterday, I was about to go to speak to the NHS Finance Academy, so to a load of NHS accountants who haven't always been my best friends because of some of those challenges that I'm kind of putting, if you like. And it was one of those really awkward moments where I joined this webinar, but I think they'd sent me the wrong link, so I was on as a participant, not as a presenter or what have you. Mm-hmm. So poor Tim was being, an NHS accountant, was being asked to ad-lib whilst I was there going, hello, you can't see me, I'm here. And he's going, has Sophie Howe joined us yet? Anyway, the poor guy literally had to ad-lib for 30 minutes whilst they were trying to get me into this thing. And so he was telling stories. So first of all, he told a story about his mental health and how he'd really suffered with his mental health. And that's because he'd been working 15-hour days as an NHS accountant, and actually it was no good to him or the organisation either. So he's really challenging people to think about that. And then he told his story about how he always liked to get back to the shop floor, and he'd gone on one of his sort of, you know, wandering around the wards, and people knew him, and it sort of said to one of the nurses, had said, oh, it's all right, Tim's one of us. And he often wondered, well, what is one of us? And he discovered that one of the problems they had was that they only had 2 salt and pepper shakers. So at mealtime, the nurses were running around, spending most of their time delivering salt and pepper to each bed. And so we'd been to speak to the probus in Ponty, and they'd given him a 20 quid payment for doing this speech. So he went to Pound Stretchers and he bought 20 new salt and pepper shakers, and it changed their lives. And 7 years later, he saw the nurse on the train going to watch the rugby in in Cardiff, and she came along. She was like, Tim, you've got to come and meet my friends. This is the guy who bought us the salt and pepper shakers. It's a tiny story, but there are so many of those people doing those small things, challenging a system. I could talk about Dr. Tom Porter, the public health consultant who's changed the way we do transportation in Cardiff. I could talk about the guys who are running Frindy Me in Gwent, who are tackling loneliness and isolation and intergenerational projects with schools. It's those guys, those local change makers who are ducking, diving, weaving, challenging the system to do better things. And those are the people we've got to get behind.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think I know the Friendly Me project. It's fantastic. Primary school working with a care home and doing sort of digital skills. Fabulous project.
On that, just a small anecdote on that. The school and the care home involved in that. So the school have reported, because they've targeted these things, this programme at kids who are probably the kids who've got adverse childhood experiences in their lives. They've seen improved behaviour and improved attendance. And the care home has seen a 50% reduction in the use of antipsychotic medication amongst their patients. That is that critically mundane stuff of getting kids to build relationships with older people. Not rocket science. Why do we not do more of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, it just takes those individuals to think, do you know what, I'm going to ask for forgiveness, not permission, and go and do those sorts of things. And yeah, absolutely. I'm going to ask a last question, one that we're going to ask of all our Tummler School guests. Probably a little bit different to you with the level of access you have, but if we were, imagine a situation where you were given a 1 minute meeting with the First Minister. So it might be the last time you get to speak to him. You've only got a minute. What would you use that minute to ask for in terms of a big change for Wales?
So I'm probably going to ask for a critically mundane thing, which is not about, oh, if only we could change policy on this or have more money for that or what have you. The thing that I'm going to say is the government should seek to bring in to government people like the people who are on this call, and people like, Tim the accountant, and people, those frustrated champions and change movers, people from NGOs, people who are artists, creatives, designers, to design and implement government policy. I think at the moment we've got a system which kind of, there's, and I've actually had this conversation with the First Minister, and he sort of described almost, it's traditionally been the approach of the civil service that in government we design policy and then we throw it over the wall, and like you lot out there, you get on with sort of implementing it. And that's why we have this implementation gap. So first of all, we've got to design better policy by getting a broader range of people involved and getting those frustrated champions and so on involved in doing that. And then we've got to make them responsible for seeing it through to implementation and being back in there, having the power to break down and sort out the reasons why stuff doesn't happen on the ground. So critically boring, not a big bang thing, but I think that would make a massive difference.
Yeah, power and accountability. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Sophie. I'm going to open to the floor if anybody wants to post a question. Emma, do you want to come in with that comment you've just popped into the chat?
Yeah, hi everyone. I was just thinking, Sophie's just talked about, top down situation with going into government, but from the bottom up perspective, I was wondering if it would be possible to amplify the stories of change makers more, in terms of I'm flooded in my arena with these stories because I've taken an interest in this subject matter. I've done training courses, I read relevant things, I'm served relevant things on Google because of algorithms. But how do we get these stories out to the general public so that more people are convinced that they can be change makers as well?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, I think, you know, there's stuff like which is, you know, coming out now, like I don't know if any of you subscribe to Positive News, for example, which is exactly that. You know, Ed Miliband's podcast, Reasons to be Cheerful, and, you know, and those sorts of things I think are really kind of starting to gain traction. I think it's potentially a different scenario if the good news stories and the positive, you know, change maker stories are trying to get to people in positions of power who should be taking them on board and making them sort of mainstream or scaling them up. Because the challenge that we have is that the whole system works against that sort of thing happening. So first of all, you know, you're governed and you're performance managed on sort of short-termism, and, you know, it's much less risky to carry on doing the stuff that you do rather than trying new and innovative stuff. There's a massively complex landscape out there which isn't joined up at all, and I think that prohibits people ability to pick this stuff up and run, you know, and sort of run with it. So I think, again, there's some kind of critically mundane stuff about how we make that happen, which is about getting the system, you know, open to allowing that to happen. And, you know, I suppose the answer that I gave to the last question is, I suppose, exactly part of that. So how do we get people like you who are connected into where the good stuff's happening, into positions where you can bring that knowledge in and help to make that good stuff happen more widely? And I think if we had, you know, a government that was open like that. I mean, yesterday I was talking to some people who do this program I absolutely love, and I recommended in the Future Generations report. It's called the Ministry of Possibilities, which is essentially what I just sort of described there. How do you bring people into government, the you know, people who've got loads of different ideas and different perspectives and so on, and get them doing stuff. And they started that in the UAE with the, you know, the equivalent of the kind of head of the cabinet office in the UAE, who started with the question to them, how do we move in the UAE towards radical curiosity and radical generosity? And this guy from an organization called IDEO, he was like, I have like landed in my dream place here. Like, how would you imagine that was the case in the UAE, which have got a whole load of other issues? But I think it's that, you know, that desire to change and that willingness to take some risks and try new things to change and bring people who are those change makers into positions where they can help you to do that.
Yeah, fab. I'm going to come to Simon next. You've got a question about resilience.
Yeah, hi, Soph.
Hiya, Simon.
I think you touched on it, you know, in terms of when you started the role, the sleepless nights of, oh, this is massive, and the kind of expectation on you and your office, really. And I think, you know, change can be tiring. Change is hard. If it was easy, we'd be doing it every day. And I think I'm just interested in your kind of take on, personally, really, on how you maintain your resilience when you're coming up against systems or thoughts or ideas or vested interest. You know, how you maintain that resilience to keep going. You know, I think having that motivation is one thing, but actually it's a grind and it's long term, and you've got to just keep going. And I think then added to that, you know, how can we support the resilience of change makers within communities as well? Because, you know, they wouldn't have the profile of you that could see the big picture, maybe outcomes, and they're coming up against these small, maybe bureaucratic issues that they constantly come back to, that it is demoralizing, it's demotivating. So yeah, just a kind of personal take on how you maintain your resilience and how we can maintain the resilience of change makers.
I suppose, I mean, yes, it's an absolutely brilliant question. And, you know, I have my days when I'm like, oh, I just give up on all of this. It's just, you know, and I suppose I'm fortunate in that I'm the sort of person who goes, you know, I'll have a night's sleep and then I'll be like, right, come on, get moving. But I suppose the stuff that really helps me to do that is the network of people around me. So, you know, and those are from my, you know, friends from my personal life to people, you know, colleagues along the way in different organizations. I think there's a really supportive network of you know, chief execs and so on that I can turn to, some of the other commissioners, for example. And my team are just absolutely, you know, absolutely amazing. So they help me to kind of, I suppose, to keep going. But I think going back to some of my earlier career, you know, where I didn't necessarily hold those positions, I suppose it was the same sort of thing. It was finding people who were going to be your champions and your cheerleaders, and who had the same sorts of, you know, views and wanted to try and achieve the same sorts of things with you, and would get behind you and alongside you, or, you know, or just pour you wine if it was needed. So I think it is about those networks, wherever and whatever level those networks might be. I think those networks are critically important at keeping people going. And then even better, I suppose, if you can make those networks you know, grow to people who do have influence to help you break down barriers and so on, that might be out there. I can remember as a young counsellor, where again I was like the mad woman who was going on about equal pay and childcare back in the sort of late 90s, making friends with a guy called John Smith, who I think was the longest serving counsellor, this brilliant Grangetown bloke, who sort of took me under his wing because I made friends with him. And he was the one who parted the waves a bit for me to say to other people, she's all right, actually, she's got a few good ideas, you know, she's only a young kid, but she's all right. And we were an unlikely pair, but that sort of relationship kind of worked.
That's brilliant, thank you. I'm conscious of time, and I've got 3 questions that people are waiting to ask. Can I ask you 3 to just give me the very quick fire? I'll take the 3 questions and we can put them to Sophie. So Rog, can you give us a very quick?
Yeah, by all means, Matt. Now that I've digested my own question, Sophie, thanks for that. Just 2 questions, quick ones. What, in your view, does new wealth creation look like? And number 2, do you foresee a situation where a stick approach might be more appropriate because change is not happening quickly enough?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thanks, Rog. Luke?
Thanks. Yeah, very quickly, just very quickly. It's a small world, Wales, and I was on a run this morning with a mate, and he's telling me about this story with Tim yesterday. He's a senior NHS finance person, and apparently it made Tim's day because there was some tagging in on Twitter or whatever, Sophie. So it went down well with him, I think. So it's interesting to hear that. Very quickly. So in the housing association sector, obviously our big challenge is decarbonisation. I like to think I'm forever optimistic, and I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's a huge opportunity for procurement, supply chains, getting people into employment, making people's homes more affordable and better quality over the years. But obviously there'll be other views where this is too big, this is a huge challenge, where do we start with this? So in terms of those change makers with the environmental agenda, who would you sort of flag that you've seen in Wales that are great sectors that maybe we could look towards as well for some ideas or some tips?
Okay, cool, great questions.
And then Andy, on this one?
Well, first we might need to rebrand as Grow Critical Mundaneness, but how do we get people to think bigger? And I'll give you a quick example. The St David's Awards, I entered someone for the Community Award, and I asked someone running the scheme, and they said, oh, well, that's our biggest category, we get 100 entries. And I said, what do you do? And they said, well, we give a winner. And I said, what do you do with the other 99? They said, nothing. And it just seems to be a wonderful example of missed opportunity. So how do we get them to think bigger?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Right, I'll try and cover all of those. So new wealth creation. So I think that, you know, it's got to, first of all, I would challenge, I suppose, a bit around wealth creation and, you know, what we value and, you know, is growth the thing that we should be focusing on. I'm not against growth. I just think that it's got to be kind of kept in check and marvelous, and within kind of planetary boundaries. So I think in terms of where we should be focusing, it should be on those industries of the future. So low carbon industries. In that slide that I flashed up, then those are the sorts of industries that I think that we should be focusing on. And I think that there are, if you look at things like, I've been working with the South Wales Industrial Cluster around how we decarbonise, manufacturing in the South Wales region. They just had quite a bit of money from the UK government to help to do that. There's loads of potential jobs and growth opportunities around that, and doing that in a kind of low carbon way. We also need to do it in a way which gets that targeted to those furthest from the labour market and those who are most disadvantaged and so on. So we must be purposeful in doing that, not just let that kind of, happen and take its course, if indeed it ever does. The stick approach, yes, absolutely, I agree with you. The stick approach. If you read the reading a procurement report is possibly not on everyone's weekend reading list, but it starts with the Welsh Government have failed to show leadership on spending for wellbeing in Wales, and it's highly critical of them. And I think I use when I think it's necessary the stick powers that I have. So things like, when I'm saying to the government, you've just declared a climate emergency, you put £220 million into your budget. On the other hand, you're spending about 75 to 80% of your infrastructure investment plan on roads. Explain that to me. What is that about? And if you don't sort it out, I will be reviewing you. You will have to make statutory recommendations. And quite frankly, it's going to be pretty embarrassing because you've just declared a climate emergency. So those are the sorts of stick powers that I have. This year, for the first time, they've done a carbon impact assessment of parts of the budget. It's not perfect by any means, but they are starting to kind of make progress there. I think it's a 67% increase in sustainable travel funding in this year's budget because of, again, some of the challenges. It's still not enough, but some of the challenges that I've said around, don't tell me that you're declaring a climate emergency when you've made no progress on the 14% of carbon emissions from transport since you've been responsible for transport. So it's those sorts of challenging things I think that we need to sort of call out. Housing decarb. So I've been doing some work on this, Luke, which I don't know, you may or may not be aware of, or have been involved in any of the kind of some of the working groups and so on. And I think that we're coming up with a bit of a plan. So I think that there's going to have to be some significant investment from Welsh Government, and there's going to have to be some borrowing from housing associations. I think that the Development Bank of Wales could be a really interesting player in this field, and I think we should be looking at things like green bonds and so on. There's lots to be kind of navigated around that. But I also think for housing associations to be looking at it through the perspective of if we need, and I can't remember what the stat was, but it was on my slide, if we need X thousand new jobs to deliver decarbonisation of homes, and the housing associations are, in many cases, their tenants are going to be people who are in either not in work or low paid work or low skilled work. Where can we be joining that stuff up? Why wouldn't we have a really targeted programme for housing tenants to be reskilling or newly skilled in these sorts of jobs, and sort of do it in that sort of way to drive multiple benefits. On the think bigger and the missed opportunities, this is kind of what I spend so much of my time doing, going and trying to say to government, when you're doing this thing, if you did it like this, you could have bigger benefits, think bigger. So as an example, the government would give money to the creative sector for freelancers who had lost all of their income because of COVID and so on. And that was, they were sort of going to do that, which is the right thing to do. But we're saying, well, actually what we need to do is to embed creative thinking into the way we develop and deliver public policy and services. So could we have a kind of freelancers pledge where there's something for something? You're getting kind of a payment from government to sustain you. What can you give back to public services? So that is now starting to roll out. The idea is that you might be able to do stuff like there's going to to be a new University Hospital of Wales. How different could that be if you brought in creatives right at the beginning of that to do the community engagement in a different way, to start talking to you about, you know, design? How might you embed, you know, culture and, you know, different ways of thinking and delivering services into what that hospital is going to be, and so on. And I think so, you know, government were going to do this just one thing, and they're now going to do something which has, you know, potentially a wider benefit. But what I think, you know, that point that I was making about bringing new people into government, that's the stuff that I think you've got to do in order to get into the mindsets of people who for their entire lives and careers have been in this silo, with not much, you know, room for manoeuvre, and not much space to be exposed to these broader, you know, the broader potential that might be out there.
Sophie, thank you so much. That's been absolutely brilliant. Sorry, we've run over a little bit. I'm just going to run through a couple of kind of links and things and shares for people. If anybody needs to go, it's 1 o'clock, obviously. If anybody needs to go, please do. But if you're going to stay on for a few minutes, I will just share a few of the things that you can follow up with. God, there it is. Tummler School will carry on, as we said, the last Friday of every month. Our next speaker is Alex Hillman, joining us from Philadelphia. So that will be at 1 o'clock instead of 12 o'clock, so he doesn't have to get up quite so early. One of the founding fathers of the co-working movement, and the guy who first flagged the idea of Tummler. So we're really, really pleased Alex will be joining us. Peter will be familiar to many of you as the chair of WCVA. Julie Lee was the first female rugby league referee in Great Britain and Australia, and is also director of Common Sense Initiative. And Luke is on the call. So hello, Luke, and we look forward to you joining us in June. Thank you very much. We'll share all those links with people, obviously, after today. We have QR code here and links to all of the social capital texts and recommended readings that we've shared if you want to take a snap of that, or we'll share the link obviously in the follow-up email. I think you probably had it in the daily email today. And finally, please come and join us in our Slack community. Again, QR code there if you want to scan that, or there's a bit.ly short link, or just search for Grow Social Capital on Slack, and come and join us for the conversations there. And that's it. Thank you very much indeed for everybody that supported Grow Social Capital and Social Capital Week 2021. It's been fantastic to see the level of interest and sharing, and people's contributions to the week. Everything we've done through the week, the 8 or 9 events, plus all the blogs and the podcasts and everything else, will be available on the website. And so we would urge you in the next week or two to pop by the website, and you can see what we have been sharing. Thank you to everybody again for joining us today. Have a good rest of the day, and go out and enjoy the sunshine. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.